Welcome to Robert Sungenis Live, this time for today's date. What is today's date? October the 11th in the year of our Lord 2023. So happy you could be with us today. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the popes, the councils, the doctors, the saints, the catechisms, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your questions have indeed been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, soon to change to Standard Time. And at the top of the program, I usually have some email questions or topics that we need to cover. And we do today. Apparently, some people weren't satisfied with my answers last week. So I have to attack them again. And that will be the bulk of our time here, probably for the first, half hour, as fast as I can get through it. Let me bring our chat room up here for those who have questions. Oh my, the questions are coming in today. So here's the rules for the questions. If you have a question, of course, not leave, but put the word question in capital letters before your question. So when I scroll down, I can see that it is indeed a question. And I will do my best to answer it. And those of you who haven't been able to ask a question because there's too many people on the board asking questions, well, try to get in here first, and maybe today may be your day, and I will try to go through these questions as fast as I possibly can to get to everybody. Let me see what else. The other rule we have, as I have said in the past, is to be kind and respectful to everybody on the chat room, and that will keep it going all by itself, I'm sure. Okay, so you can probably guess that a question we have from last week that might even be on the board this week is my dealing with the whole dubia to Pope Francis from the 5 cardinals, and 2 complaints I had coming in. One was that I appeared a bit condescending to those who may take an opposite opinion. And I haven't seen my previous program, but I have a tendency to get condescending. I can relate. So it's not like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall here. Especially when, I get passionate about something and I feel that the majority are wrong or not really thinking this thing out, I can get condescending. And so let's just assume that I was, and I apologize for that. Ipso facto. I'm not even going to argue against the case because, I'm a sinner just like everybody else, and I do have those tendencies. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. At any rate, let's see, what else was there? That I was being too lenient on Pope Francis, and probably was. Okay, and I want to explain that today and hopefully balance things out. But I had 2 wonderful page and a half emails from patrons of mine from way back. And I know they're very faithful men, and they were as kind to me as, as could be in their gentle rebuke of my approach. And I appreciated that as well. And I think to sort of balance things out at the beginning, what I want to say is if I was a bit brusque and a bit being too lenient on Pope Francis. The reason may be that I had something in my mind that I think I expressed, but I didn't make it clear enough that was the position from where I was coming from, and that is the reaction of Archbishop Viganò to what transpired between the 5 cardinals and Pope Francis. And if you don't remember what that was, his conclusion was that, well, maybe Pope Francis is not the Pope. And it's that stuck in my craw. And that was the basis from which I was answering, giving my opinion. And let me say again, this program, Robert Sungenis Live, is all about Robert Sungenis' opinions. Okay? So whether you can take that to the bank or not, who knows? But I try my best, and this is a difficult situation, that is for sure. I may not say everything correctly, and not everything I wanted to say, and probably missed a lot of things I should have said. But here I got another chance to, do it right and make sure that I cross all the T's and dot all the I's before I can have you walk away satisfied that indeed your question has been answered, as I say at the top of the show, every time we have a program. So I better make sure that I get that done. So accept my apologies, please, and let's move on. All right. So I am going to read major portions from the letter I got from Greg and from Luca. I'm not going to give their last names to protect their privacy, but let me just reiterate that my whole take on this was in reaction to Archbishop Viganò. Okay, because when you start saying things like, well, maybe he's not the Pope, wow, have you crossed the line? And you are being as bad as you claim the Pope is, for you to overreact to this and start claiming that, because that's going to hurt the average Catholic out there. Well, we got an archbishop saying, and I'm going to wonder all the time now whether he's the Pope or not. That's what that does. Okay. So that's where I was coming from. And I'm not going to come from there today because I already did that last week. I'm going to come from a different perspective. And that is, how do we let's just deal with Francis himself. Who is this man? Does he have an agenda? Or is he really seeking to improve the Catholic Church? Okay. I think that's a good way to put it. And so let me read a little bit of these letters so that you can get a feel for, because if these people are writing it, that means a lot of other people out there are feeling the same thing and just can't write in or whatever. And so these people speak for them. So here goes. I'm going to just skip through it because he says a lot of things that aren't necessarily connected here, but he says, he said I had this little condescending attitude, and forgive me for that. And so what's the best way to handle this here? He says, many people have great respect for the prior teachings and culture of the church. Also, there are many instances of Pope Francis talking out of both sides of his mouth. For example, he says that sodomy is a sin, but he grants an audience to and gives encouragement to the corrupt Father James Martin, who actively pushes sodomy. Okay, good point. Good point. Some people think that Pope Francis and his whole Vatican are the fifth column and are working diligently to undermine the long and true teachings of the Church. Are their concerns unfounded? Okay, that's another statement he makes. When you do this, you're not exhibiting proper Christian charity. Okay, we already went through that. Let me see. That's just a... it seems that the Pope and you, as an analogy, position the issue like two different playing cards. Real marriage is like the king, whereas a same-sex union is a jack. The two are distinct, yet at least in terms of their pure definition. However, a better analogy to the real issue would be to compare a king to a tarot card. One is authentic and true, and the other is evil and satanic. The Pope never addresses in his letter the fact that same-sex unions are sinful and evil. We're not talking about friendships here. No, we're talking about behavior that is on a vector towards sodomy. Okay, so there's another point. Okay. I have a God-ordained role to protect my family, and so do all these people whom you claim are just mean, obtuse, and have no love in their heart. I don't know if I went that far, Greg, but anyway, the concerns with synodality are that the structure that Christ established will get compromised by allowing the sheep to determine doctrine. Okay, the letter does address this by stating that synodality is just a way of helping the faithful to have means of expression in matters not doctrinal. If this is the case, then no problem at all. But why hasn't the Pope clearly communicated this? Why do people have concerns about synodality if that's all it is? Good point. Okay, let's go move on. Catholics who are well-informed, faithful, with Christian love in their hearts and actions, have real concerns about the Jesuits and what they're attempting to do to the church. And that's a very good point. All right. You admit this when you criticize Cardinal Viganò for stating that we need to, quote, seriously consider if Pope Francis is the real Pope, unquote. Your comment on Viganò's statement is that this confuses people and is bad. Well, Pope Francis himself confuses the faithful and is also bad. If Pope Francis's real intent is, as your interpretation of the letter indicates, then this is a sign of confidence for the concerned. Okay. And he says, still a fan of yours. I'm just giving you feedback on one particular talk you gave. Hopefully I'm not a hypocrite and haven't condescended toward you. If I have, let me apologize in advance. No problem, Craig. All is taken as just exchanging information here. Okay, so now Luca writes to me. I watched the last show, and I have to be brutally honest that even though I am a huge fan of your apologetics ever since I've ran into one of your debates, I'm quite confused by that show. Have you defended Pope Francis because there is nothing that anybody can point out that is heretical? Or because you actually like the answers you see and nothing is wrong with them at all? Okay, fair question. However, just because someone is not making clear doctrinal errors does not mean it's not detrimental to the church and the faithful. Agreed? Yeah, I'd have to agree to that. Yes, definitely. So now I don't want to give any answers before I read all these. So, okay. I mean, even you said plenty of times the world is going to hell. I'm assuming that by that you mean the more people, especially declared Catholics, are living their lives less and less according to morality of Catholic faith. And I agree. But aren't recent popes in, say, 100 years a bit responsible for that? Good point. But other Catholics, who are probably like 90 to 95% of all Catholics, go with the liberal interpretation. Like, say, when the Pope says, "Who am I to judge?" is a perfect example of that. Yea, we know what he means, but 99% of the population of this world took it as a sign of change in Catholic Church teaching. Good point. In those words, who am I to judge? In the same way that you've explained the Pope's response to those dubia questions. Let me see. I got in half a sentence there. I mean, he didn't say anything heretical there, but was the effect of these words positive or negative on the whole church and faithful? What would you say? Good point. Didn't God possibly hear the same what he did with allowing the Israelites to have kings or divorces? Not good for them, but God wanted to teach them a lesson due to their stubbornness and hardness of their hearts. Yes, that thought has crossed my mind, and I will probably develop that when I answer this. Because that's how I interpret all the ambiguities of Pope Francis, especially. But our speech should be yes, yes, and no, no. Okay, all right, good point. But I know what you think about that decision regarding historical criticism. So why we cannot see the same way some of the statements of the Pope? Okay, let me see what that context was here. Oh, Pope Pius XII allowed historical criticism. He didn't say you could believe it. He just said you could study it. Nothing wrong and heretical with that. So there shouldn't be any problem with that. Same as those answers to the dubia from Pope Francis. Okay, so you're giving a lot of leeway here to Pope Francis in that regard. Okay. So what's wrong with saying, no, we cannot bless actively homosexual people in any way, either as a marriage type blessing or non-marriage type, because this lifestyle is completely against God's teaching, and it would give the wrong impression to the faithful. Good point. And just a couple more points here. The bottom line is, do you think that those answers from Pope Francis will bring the faithful closer to God and his church, or will rather drive them away? I think I've heard you many times in the past where you pointed out the very things that the problem with Pope Francis is that he makes those statements from time to time that can be taken either way. So did you change your stance on Pope Francis's pontificate, or did you focus yesterday strictly on defending Pope Francis from Archbishop Viganò's accusation, and that's why it seemed you changed your position? Well, thank you for saying that, because that is exactly where I was coming from, as I said. Okay, and maybe that led me to be too lenient on Pope Francis. And as you know, when Robert Sungenis smells a dead fish in the room, he doesn't hesitate to call it a stinking mass that needs to get out of here. Okay. So that much you can depend upon me for. So I guess it was a little difficult for me to be as hard on Francis as I would have liked to have been, and at the same time deal with Archbishop Viganò's extreme, totally out of the realm kind of reaction that, look, one thing we want to do as Catholics is we can react and react with all the faith we have, but we don't want to overreact. And I don't mean overreact in the sense that you get a little bit more emotional about it. I mean overreact in the sense that you go to a completely dubious position yourself, okay? Because think about it. If we just have to deal with Francis's ambiguities and compromises and whatever you want to call them, okay, we deal with them. The doctrine's not going to change. Okay, that's what we believe as Catholics. They can talk all they want. Synodality here and Pachamama there and whatever it is, they can talk all they want. Okay? But whether the doctrine is going to change is like a totally different story altogether. And if we can't believe that as Catholics, then forget it. Why be Catholic? Okay. So, and we haven't it proven to ourselves for 2,000 years. Has any dogma changed in the Catholic Church? No, not one. When I begin my debates with Protestants, I say, look, if you can prove that a doctrine of the Catholic Church has changed, officially, dogmatically changed, okay, then I'll become a Protestant again. Because there's no use being a Catholic. If the doctrines can change, if they change today, they're going to change tomorrow and the next day. Okay? So there's no use being Catholic if the doctrines change. The big question is, are the men in the church and outside the church going to obey the doctrines? And that's what we see right now. Okay? Even right up to the Pope. You know, he can talk and talk and talk, and he can be ambiguous and, you know, whatever he wants to do, he can talk, but the doctrine doesn't change. Okay? And that's what we need to be prepared for with every pope that comes along. There are exceptional cases where some popes were so good, so saintly, that we wouldn't even think of them saying something ambiguous. Okay? And that's because men are different. Even popes, they're different. We've had some humdingers in our Catholic history. Some bad popes. Okay? But none of them changed the doctrine. They may have disobeyed the doctrine themselves, okay, and lived immoral lives and actually killed people. But the doctrine never changes. The church stays with its foundation. And that's what makes it the Catholic Church. Okay? So you're going to get some doozies that come along. Really. And we've had some doozies in the 20th century. And maybe not everything they did was wrong, but there was a lot that, wow, we're just like, where did you come from? And that's never going to change because men are men. See, Jesus did not promise an impeccable papacy. He promised that the doctrine would never change. Whatever the church bound, heaven would bind. And so we know it's infallible. Okay? So that's the bottom line with all of this. Now, let me get to some of the other issues. On this issue of, homosexual blessing or whatever they want to call it, again, there's a lot of talk. Okay? And look, these guys, these liberals, these Jesuits have been chewing at the edges for years now. Okay? I mean, the Jesuits are probably the worst apostolate the church has ever had. Sorry, St. Ignatius, but in your day, they were good. And then they went down, and then they went up, and then they went down, and now they're still down. I wouldn't trust a Jesuit as far as I could throw them. And that ain't very far. Okay? I take everything a Jesuit says with a grain of salt because I know where they come from. I know how they think. I read their magazines. I read their books. I know where they're coming from. And they're all alike. Okay? So right there, you have a strike against the Pope because he's a Jesuit. And he thinks like Jesuits. And it's all, love and kindness and all that's good. In the right context, all that is good. But when you start using the love and kindness argument against whether a doctrine should remain in the church, then you've gone down the wrong way. And don't ever be sucked into that. And I think that's a lot of what Francis does in his response, is he tries to press the guilt button on the 5 cardinals and more or less implies, accuses subtly that bringing all these doctrinaire issues to me. Check your heart out, man. Do you really have love in your heart? And, are you looking with a pastoral sense and all that can be very detrimental. Okay. Now, every one of us has to examine our conscience before we come to a debate. And this is a debate of where we are, virtue-wise. Okay. And if we're not fit, if we have a doubt about our virtue when we come into a debate, don't debate, because it's going to come out. Okay. It's going to come out what virtue you haven't polished in your soul when you start debating. And the first thing someone's going to do is say, oh, he has no love in his heart. I've had people say that to me, and probably rightly so, because at times I can get pretty nasty. When I feel like they're just they just built the wall and they're not going to listen, or they pretend to listen, and the first time that you show that you're not as saintly as you might appear to be, and that happens to me a lot. Oh my gosh, did you listen to? And there goes the whole debate, because I wasn't forthright enough to show the love and kindness that should come along with every word that comes out of my mouth. Okay. And so it's my fault. But on the other hand, watch the people who use that argument, because they're going to use it to try to say that what you're saying doctrinally is not right. And they're going to use the love and kindness card to bring that to the forefront and make people think that because you didn't have love and kindness in your heart when you said the words, then the doctrine itself is wrong. No, it just means that I need to learn to say it with more love and kindness in my heart. That's what it means. But then you'll find when you do that they'll still reject the doctrine. Why? Well, because they had an agenda all along. They weren't going to accept your doctrine. Okay? They're just using the lack of love and kindness as an excuse. And so you find that out later. Okay? Yeah, this is the way the world works, unfortunately. So with Francis, let me be a little harder on Francis. Again, opinion of Robert Sungenis. Take it or leave it. Okay? But here's the other side of the story. Yes, these two gentlemen who wrote in are correct. Your yes should be yes, and your no should be no. As a matter of fact, when the 5 cardinals wrote the dubia to the Pope, he came back with these evasive kind of non-heretical, but evasive answers to their questions. Okay. And that's what I read to you last week. Okay. So the 5 cardinals saw this and they said, okay, he's answering a little bit of what we asked, but he's avoiding the tougher part of what we asked. So we're going to ask him again. And we're going to tell him that, okay, Pope, this is what you answer to us. And okay for that answer, but it really didn't get to the heart of the matter. And so we're going to rephrase the question to you, and it was resubmitted to the Pope, and we don't have those answers yet from the Pope. So we're waiting to see from the rephrased questions that these 5 cardinals gave, and they're really good. They're really good. These guys are smart. They got right to the heart of the issue, and they said, okay, Francis, you said this, but what about this part here? What about the ramifications of your answer? Blah, 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 blah. And they just laid it down thick. And, I can't wait to see what the Pope says about these, if he answers them. Okay. I mean, they've got this guy backed into a corner. And this is how God works. This is how God saves the church. Okay? Because if you go the least bit off kilter, There's guys out there that are watching every word you say and every move you make. And it's their job. It's their job. That's why God put them there. Okay? That's why Paul told Peter, you got it wrong, Jack. Here's the way you should be going. So the Bible itself gives us that instance where even the Pope can be corrected in his behavior. And that's exactly what Francis is doing. He's given us his behavior because his answers are his behavior. All right? So if you can't say yes to the question, are homosexual blessings allowed? Then you got to, I'm sorry, can't say no to the question whether homosexual blessings are allowed. You got problems. And that's what we saw in his answer. He didn't say yes or no. He curved around it somehow where, it's a pastoral issue and each pastor has to make his decision, which means the Pope's not going to make the decision. It's like the Supreme Court on the abortion issue. What was that, last year? Did the Supreme Court say abortion was wrong? No. Not even close. What did they do? They passed the buck to the states. And that may have caused more confusion than we had before. So now you're going to have 50 different laws on abortion by the states. And we already saw how that's dividing the country. So did it really help that we have 3 new Supreme Court justices that are conservative? No, because see, what they answered is from the law, from the legal standpoint. From the constitutional legal standpoint, the Supreme Court really shouldn't be deciding this issue. So what kind of answer is that? Okay, so maybe on the one hand, we could say, all right, well, abortion's not ipso facto anymore. It's like now, in limbo. Okay. And we have to say, but what kind of leadership is that? Okay. It just shows you that this whole idea of democracy, where the Supreme Court is going to answer all these difficult questions for us. Are you kidding? And the one time that we would depend upon them to give us the moral decision, but they don't deal in morality, the Supreme Court. They're legalists. It's based on law. And if the Constitution says, okay, you can't be making those decisions, that's all they can say. They can't say whether abortion's right or wrong. Now, they may believe that personally, but they have no room to express their moral certitude against abortion in the legal system that we have. They can't do it. All they can do is give a legal answer to the question. And the legal answer is, we don't have the legal right to answer it. Okay? So it's pushed off to the states. And that's more or less what Pope Francis was doing. Saying, well, it's like the who judge, or, when he said on the airplane, who am I to judge? Well, you're the Pope. That's why you're the guy to judge. You're the Pope. And so he passed the buck and saying, well, I can't judge, I can't judge. So we'll let somebody else be the judger. Okay. And then if we have problems, we'll deal with them. But this idea of passing the buck whenever he's pressured to give a definitive answer, yes or no. Okay. Now I agree. Somebody can pose a question and say, no, yes or no. And look, some questions can't be answered with a yes or no. They're that difficult. They're that complicated. Okay, so you have room to say, well, I can't answer yes or no in some instances. Okay, but when you're dealing with a clear-cut issue like this, wherein you know that what you say, people are going to take as the definitive issue regardless whether you meant it to be definitive. Because why? Because you're the Pope. Okay? Now, when I started my analysis of the Pope's answers to the 5 cardinals last week, you remember what I said? First thing I said, and I remember this distinctly, even though I haven't seen the recording of it, I said, this is a masterpiece of diplomacy. Okay? A masterpiece of diplomacy. Why? Well, because there's nothing really there that you can say the Pope, said something heretical or gave the okay to homosexual blessing. Nothing there that you could point the finger at and say, there it is. Told you all along. Nope. And it's written exactly that way. Masterfully, diplomatically. Okay. And the weight of the answer is on being kind and, pity people in their situation and all that stuff, that when people hear that, they say, oh, he's being so nice and he really cares about people and all this stuff. And on the one hand, maybe he is. I mean, there's a lot in Pope Francis that does care about people, except when he goes and slaps women, in the Vatican receptive area there. I wondered, wow, that's not being very kind, Pope, is it? And I think you all remember what I'm talking about. This old woman came up to him and touched him, and he shushed her hand away like, what are you doing touching me? Kind of a thing. And what impression does that give? Okay. So I wonder, where's the disconnect? Francis is preaching, love and kindness to people, and then he goes and slaps this woman away, and she's like, what? So I often wonder, like these Jesuits that often talk about, love and kindness and all this, all that's great, but I really wonder how love and kind they are inside. I really do. I find in life, and I've lived long enough to discern this, that all those that talk about love and kindness, when push comes to shove, sometimes they're the least loving and kind people that you could run into. Believe me. All the liberals like to wear their hearts on their sleeves, say, I'm just so full of love and peace and kindness and all this stuff. But, they're the very same people that kill babies in the womb. And where's all the love and kindness there? It's all selfishness, isn't it? Yeah. I don't want to put up with this baby. I can't care for it. I don't know how I got into this in the first place, but I can sure know how to end it. And that's kill the darn thing. Yeah, they talk about love and peace and kindness and all this stuff. Oh, yeah. Liberals are an interesting bunch, aren't they? Anyway, so I hope I'm making my point that, look, I don't want to give this Pope Francis, a break. Okay. All I'm trying to do is save his papacy against extremists like Father Viganò. That's my point. Because the structure of the Catholic Church is just as important doctrinally as any doctrine that you can think of. Okay? Because if the structure, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church goes, then you don't have a church. And if some Tom, Dick, or Harry out there can just whimsically say, well, he's, we ought to consider that he's not the Pope. My goodness. Okay? I mean, that would harm the church more than any blessing given to a homosexual. Okay? Because that rips down the whole church. It just makes it illegitimate from the get-go. Okay? That we have to protect, and that was my frame of mind. So I hope you can understand that. But I'm not giving a free pass to Francis. Look, I was one of the first guys out there to say, when you say, who am I to judge? Do you understand the position you have? Do you understand who you are? And maybe somebody says, well, maybe he does, and that's why he said it, because he knows he's going to have the greatest influence on what everybody thinks. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Okay. I mean, this guy may be a demon inside that he's hiding very well. Who knows? All we can judge him by is what he says, and the rest that we don't know exactly what he says and may be implying something, then we have to be very cautious. Very cautious, but not to the point where we say, oh, well, he may not be the Pope. Can never go that far. See, that's what happened to Martin Luther and John Calvin and all these other guys. Yeah. Look, they were actually selling indulgences. Let's be honest. They were going over and above board what was allowed by indulgences, and they were building St. Peter's with the money that came in. And it was just too easy to make someone think that you may lose your salvation if you don't give your little drachma to the church. Wow, that was just too easy for Tetzel. And he did it over and over and over again. Now, you're a poor monk like Luther who beats himself with a stick so that he can be obedient to God. And he sees this Tetzel selling indulgences and making money hand over fist to build this big, elaborate, St. Peter's with all the statues and everything else and look like it's real holy. What do you think that's going to do to a guy like Luther? Yeah, it's going to trouble him. Okay. And he rightly reacted against that. And what's the problem? He overreacted. Okay. Now the whole Catholic Church is disgusting. It's just, wasn't true from the beginning, blah, 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 blah. So he could go away and start his own church. Okay. That's the perfect example of overreaction. And that's exactly what Viganò is doing. Okay. We're going to throw away the whole church, the baby with the bathwater, because, the church or the Pope implied that homosexual blessings may be okay. Like I said, the Pope can talk all he wants. Okay. Now, the other point that Luca had brought up was, where's God's role in this? And as I've said many times, God is not neutral when it comes to these things. If you want to go sin, you know what God's going to say to you? Go ahead. Enjoy yourself. And that's going to be your punishment. Because sooner or later, you're going to find out what that sin does to you. It destroys you. And that's what I want to do to you. But I'm going to allow your own sin to do that for you. I'm not going to come down with a bolt of lightning. I hardly ever do that. I just let you follow your sin to the extent that you want to follow it, and you'll see the extent of the detriment that it does to you. Yeah. Okay. We've seen that over and over again in Scripture. God did it with the divorce law. The Israelites wanted to divorce. God said, I don't like divorce. And God said, okay, here's what we'll do. Go ahead and divorce. You can divorce to your heart's content. And now, and look what's going to happen to your society. What happened? They destroyed themselves. Okay. They became apostate. Because once you start to unravel that sweater with one thread, you know what happens, right? Yep. See, the whole thing has to fit together real nice. Everybody's got to do their job to keep that society healthy and mature. Right from the get-go, right when they came out of Egypt, they had this problem. They all wanted a divorce. Well, maybe they learned it from the Egyptians. Well, maybe so. They're supposed to be different than the Egyptians. That's why God took them out of there. They're supposed to be giving the example to people. Then they wanted a king. We want a king like all the other nations. God said, I can tell you right up front, people, you think that's good? That's good. You're going to be like the other nations. Look at them. Look how immoral they are. You want to be like them? And you don't want me to be your leader to tell you right from wrong every time you have a question about it and it leads you down the right path every single time, 100%? You don't want that? Oh, no, we want a king. Okay, you can have your king. And guess what? Yeah. Except for David, and even he had his faults. Solomon, his son, became apostate at the end of his life. King Saul was apostate before he became king and remained that way. And then the kingdom split into the northern kingdoms and the southern kingdoms. Every single king of the northern kingdom, 20 of them, were all evil. They all had an epitaph said, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. In the southern kingdom, we had 20 kings also, and 10 of them were evil, 10 were so-so, and 3 were good. 3. Okay? And God told them, don't go that way. But they went that way, and God let them go that way. Okay? So we may have the same thing now. All this ambiguous language out there. And remember, I wrote a book on the ambiguities of Vatican II. What were they all about? Because there are ambiguous statements there. Okay? Now, Vatican II, I love Vatican II. Have you ever read all the documents of Vatican II? All 16 documents? There is a defense of the gospel that I've never seen before. It's tremendous. But then there are certain paragraphs that liberals and conservatives fought over, and you'll see deliberate ambiguities in some of these documents. They don't come right out and say which direction they're going. And what happened was the ambiguities were interpreted by the liberals in the church, the progressives, the guys, and the best way to interpret or understand a liberal or progressive is somebody who wants to change the doctrine because he doesn't like the way it is now. That's the best definition I can think of. Got to have changes, baby. Okay? And anyway, so the liberals and conservatives fought on these. Liberals usually won, but they weren't allowed to win because Pope Paul VI got wind of it, and he was watching these guys. As a matter of fact, they had put one paragraph in one of the documents of Vatican II. Pope Paul VI saw it, called up the right guys and said, get that thing out of there. And they did. Okay. So when they went too far, the Pope was being guided by the Holy Spirit, because this was an ecumenical council, signed off by the Pope, all 16 documents, and he's not going to sign his name to something that has heretical error in it. Okay. But there were ambiguities left. Well, I could tell you this big, long story about that. Give you a perfect example of it, but I'm not going to do that right now. But the fact is, where was the Holy Spirit's role in that? Well, here's the way God works. The same way he worked in the Old Testament. Same God, yesterday, today, and forever. Works the same way. And here's what he probably did. He said, okay, you can have your ambiguity. It's not doctrinally heretical, so nobody could point their finger there, but it is ambiguous in the sense that you can interpret it the right way, in line with tradition, or you could interpret it the liberal way, wherein you want to change the doctrine. And so God let him. He let him change the doctrine. Not that God's behind that. No. God allowed the ambiguity in Vatican II, but he didn't lead them into the liberal interpretation they have of it. And the liberal interpretation wanted to change the doctrine based on the ambiguity in the Vatican II text. So God said, go ahead. See what that does to you. And so why do you think we have so many homos in the church today? Pedophiles. And it's still going on. Oh, yeah. They think they've won because they weren't ousted out of the church. Where do you think all that comes from? Well, it comes from a liberal reading of Vatican II and a liberal reading of Scripture. Okay, wherein you can say, well, St. Paul just gave those commandments against, or those decrees against homosexuality because, that was the culture he lived in. We're much more mature now. We're 20 centuries removed from St. Paul. And we even know by genetics that homosexuality is caused by the genes you got from your mom and dad. Not your fault. St. Paul never knew that. So you see how they can interpret based on what they think they know from the ambiguity that might be in Vatican II or the stipulations that may be from St. Paul. Okay, either way, they're going to twist it to get what they want. Okay, so that's what you see now. And God may be saying, hey, you want to live as homosexual? Go ahead. See what it does for you. And like it says in Romans chapter 1, 3 times it says it, verses 18 to 33. It says God allows them, God leads them into this type of activity to go after their own lusts. Okay? He gives them over is the Greek word. He gives them over to their own lusts. So you can see how God's not neutral, is he? No, you decide to go after sins, especially of that nature, that serious nature, yeah, God will help you along the way. Let me take your hand. Okay? Because he knows they're not going to listen to St. Paul or anybody else to stop it. No. You see, I got this from my parents. It's all gene-based. I can't help myself. That's what you'll get from them. And God says, okay, go ahead. Go down that path. And that's why we have the highest mortality rate of any group in the world among homosexuals. The highest. Okay. And it gets worse. So, this may be happening. But what we do know is the doctrine's not going to change. Doctrine's not going to change. Okay. And that's all we have to hold on to. Next question is, are you going to obey the doctrine? Or are you going to find ways around it? Okay. And the Jesuits are famous for doing that. Always finding ways around, using a lot of words and semantics and analogies and all kinds of things. You should read their writings. The magazine America is one of the worst. My gosh, these guys. I think they stand up all night long thinking of ways they can say it where it just doesn't directly come out and say it, but it just underneath, that's what you're reading. And it's just appalling. Okay. So beware of that. So for all these things that the Pope has to deal with, maybe I should give you an example of what these 5 cardinals came back with the second dubia. Okay. Because it's better than their first one. And rightly so. Because, look, like I said, it's their job to do this. And the Pope should be listening. Okay, so let me see. Okay, this is what they say. Number 1, Your Holiness, that's the Pope, insists that the Church can deepen its understanding of the deposit of faith. This is indeed what Dei Verbum 8 teaches and belongs to Catholic doctrine. Your response, however, does not capture our concern. Many Christians, including pastors and theologians, argue today that the cultural and anthropological changes of our time should push the church to teach the opposite of what it has always taught. This concerns essential, not secondary, questions of our salvation, like the confession of faith, subjective conditions for access to the sacraments, and observance of the moral law. So, we want to rephrase our dubium. Is it possible? And by the way, before I read all these, take me about 10 minutes. They say, look, Pope, we want a yes or no answer. Can you do that for us? Yes or no? Not maybe, not perhaps, not maybe tomorrow. Yes or no today. Can you do that for us? That's what they ask. I forget where I read that, but I did read. Oh, here it is. We therefore repropose our questions to you so that they can be answered with a simple yes or no. All right. So we want to rephrase our dubium. Is it possible for the church today to teach doctrines contrary to those she has previously taught in matters of faith and morals, whether by the Pope ex cathedra or in the definitions of an ecumenical council or in the ordinary universal magisterium of the bishops dispersed throughout the world? Now, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Pretty clear question. I mean, it's one of those questions that if you don't answer yes or no, you're hiding something. Okay, so this is what the Pope is faced with now, the second dubium, okay, which we didn't read last week. Okay, number 2. Oh, this is so good. These guys are so good. Your Holiness has insisted on the fact that there can be no confusion between marriage and other types of unions of a sexual nature, and that therefore any rite or sacramental blessing of same-sex couples which would give rise to such confusion should be avoided. Our concern, however, is a different one. We are concerned that the blessing of same-sex couples might create confusion in any case, not only in that it might make them seem analogous to marriage, but also in that homosexual acts would be presented practically as good, or at least as the possible good that God asked of people in their journey toward him. Okay? So let us rephrase our dubium. Is it possible that in some circumstances a pastor could bless unions between homosexual persons, thus suggesting that homosexual behavior as such would not be contrary to God's law and the person's journey toward God? Seems like a yes or no answer is required, doesn't it? Linked to this dubium is the need to raise another. Does the teaching upheld by the universal ordinary magisterium that every sexual act outside of marriage, and in particular homosexual acts, constitutes an objectively grave sin against God's law, regardless of the circumstances in which it takes place and the intention with which it is carried out? Does it continue to be valid? Talk about putting him in a corner. Let's read another one. You have insisted, Pope, that no, he doesn't say Pope. I'm just putting that in there because it says you, and I want you to know who you is. You have insisted that there is a synodal dimension to the church in that all, including the lay faithful, are called to participate and make their voices heard. Our difficulty, however, is another. I love how they do that. Today, the future synod of synodality is being presented as if, in communion with the Pope, it represents the supreme authority of the Church. However, the Synod of Bishops is a consultative body of the Pope. It does not represent the College of Bishops and cannot settle the issues within it nor issue decrees on them. unless in certain cases the Roman pontiff, whose duty it is to ratify the decisions of the synod, has expressly granted it deliberative power. Canon 343 from the canon of the Catholic Church. This is a decisive point, inasmuch as not involving the College of Bishops, it matters such as those that the next synod intends to raise, which touch on the very constitution of the Church, would go precisely against the root of that synodality, which it claims to want to promote. So, let us therefore rephrase our dubium. Will the Synod of Bishops to be held in Rome, which is going on right now, by the way, and which includes only a chosen representation of pastors and faithful, exercise in the doctrinal or pastoral matters on which it will be called to express itself, the supreme authority of the Church, but which belongs exclusively to the Roman Pontiff and the College of Bishops? In other words, is it the intention of this synod to give doctrinal power to this, what do they call it? The Synod of Bishops that are handpicked by the Pope? And if it does, hey, wait a minute. There's this thing called, the bishops of the church that have already been appointed, that have been given authority by Jesus to help make the Pope make decisions. What about us? Okay. So are you going to replace us with this Synod of Bishops that you've handpicked for yourself? And I bet you they're all Jesuits. That's a good yes or no question. Demands a yes or no answer. Okay. Now remember, this is all talk now. Okay. Everybody's talking. And they can talk till they're blue in the face. Whether anything's going to be done about it or if changes are going to be made, that's a whole other ball of wax. Number 4, in your reply, Your Holiness made it clear that the decision, now the reply is what we read last week, coming from the Pope, okay? In your reply, Your Holiness made it clear that the decision of St. John Paul II in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis is to be held definitively, and rightly added that it is necessary to understand the priesthood, not in terms of power, but in terms of service, in order to understand correctly our Lord's decision to reserve holy orders to men only. On the other hand, in the last point of your response, you added that the question can still be further explored. We are concerned that some may interpret this statement to mean that the matter has not been decided in a definitive manner. In fact, St. John Paul II affirms in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis that this doctrine has been taught infallibly by the ordinary and universal magisterium, and therefore that it belongs to the deposit of faith. This was the response of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to a dubium raised about the apostolic letter, and this response was approved by John Paul II himself. Okay, so here I am not as I would like to be, but I'm not as much on the side of the 5 cardinals as I would like to be. But that is because why was a dubium given to the Vatican if Ordinatio Sacerdotalis was so clear that the document was infallible? Okay? Because the document doesn't say this is an infallible, irreformable statement by the Pope of the Catholic Church. Bang, bang, no questions asked. Clear as day. Okay? Why wasn't that put in there? And we can tell that nothing like that was put in there. Otherwise, why would they send a dubium and ask, hey, is this infallible? Okay? Now, they have every right to ask that question. Is this infallible? Okay? Now, here's the other problem. They say that it was answered, the response was that it was infallible, but that was by the CDF under Joseph Ratzinger. It wasn't from the Pope. The Pope didn't come back and say, I'm sorry, I forgot to put that in there. This is an infallible, irreformable statement. For all time, it cannot be changed. Blah, blah, blah. John Paul II didn't say that. Ratzinger came back and said, all right, you're going to push us to the wall. It's infallible. But he has no authority to say that. Well, he has authority, and he can say it, but he has no authority to bind it because he's not the Pope. Okay? And this is what happens, as I've said many times, if you're not clear, if the document is not clear that this is an infallible statement, and all it takes is how many words? This is an infallible statement. 5 words. That's all it takes. And the matter's settled. Okay? But they don't. And they haven't learned yet that that's what they should do. And that's why a lot of documents are, is that infallible? Okay? So you've got to make it clear. So I think Pope Francis has a point here. Okay? And if they say, well, that was approved by John Paul, where? I don't know where John Paul approved that. That's the whole issue, is that he didn't come out with a written statement saying, and I approve this decision by Cardinal Ratzinger that Ordinatio Sacerdotalis is infallible. John Paul II, October 1994. We don't have anything like that. Okay? Now look, don't misunderstand me. Okay? I'm not for women ordination at all. Okay? I've written that many times in the books and lectures that I've given. And who am I anyway? Okay? But I'm just telling you, as far as my interpretation of what's being said here, you can't come to me and say, well, Bob, we all know that you're for women's ordination anyway, right? So that's why you're critiquing this. No. If there's anybody who's against it, it's me. Okay, so I don't come from a biased position. I come from a position where I've had to struggle with this myself in debates that I've had with Protestants. Someone will ask me, well, hey, Robert, is this doctrine infallible? And I have to say, honestly, well, we've taken it as infallible, but if you're looking for the words, this is an infallible doctrine written by the Pope of the Catholic Church, you ain't going to find it. And then I wonder why can't the canon law came out, what's it, 7, 13, 14, something like that. It says, nothing is to be taken as infallible unless it's manifestly evident. Now, if you look at Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, you have to ask yourself, is it manifestly evident that it's infallible? Now, it might be true, correct, yeah, all that, okay? But the only way you're going to shut these guys up is if you say, it's infallible. I don't want to hear you, okay? It's the only way you're going to do it. And I wish they would realize that, What does it take? 5 words. This is an infallible statement. So, you're not going to get my sympathy on that one. All right, we got one more to go here, and then we'll get to your questions. Okay. Finally, Your Holiness confirmed the teachings of the Council of Trent, according to which the validity of sacramental absolution requires a sinner's repentance, which includes the resolve not to sin again. And you invited us not to doubt God's infinite mercy. We would like to reiterate that our question does not arise from doubting the greatness of God's mercy, but, on the contrary, it rises from our awareness that this mercy is so great that we are able to convert to Him, to confess our guilt, and to live as He taught us, period. In turn, some might interpret your answer as meaning that merely approaching confession is a sufficient condition for receiving absolution. inasmuch as it could implicitly include confession of sins and repentance. We would therefore like to rephrase our dubia. Can a penitent who, while admitting a sin, refuses to make in any way the intention not to commit it again, validly receive sacramental absolution? And that's it. Okay. So they have a point. But I don't think it's as strong as a point as the other points they've made. Because when I read what the Pope said, it was like, okay, trying to approach the confessional, wherein before they were saying, the heck with the Catholic Church, who cares what they think? And yet now they're coming to the point where they're wondering, gee, did I do the right thing? When I divorced and remarried, did I do the right thing? And they come to the bishop and they start talking, or the priest, and they start talking about it, and they've got a guilty conscience and they want it relieved, and they're approaching it step by step. Okay. That was the Pope's point, is that, look, there's something happening here that at least we can look at on a case-by-case basis, without implying from that, hey, it's okay, everybody, any Catholic out there divorced can get remarried, no problem. I think that was his point. I think he has a valid point. Okay. That there's always been this debate between mercy and law. In the history of Christendom, in the history of Judaism, you can read the Old Testament, you see it over and over and over again. Where the difficulty is, okay, if we give strict interpretation of law, don't even consider his intentions, don't consider the circumstances, don't consider this, that, and the other thing that all can be involved, you know what? Nobody could really live. You know? Nobody. Because who obeys the law 100%? This is the whole reason Jesus did away with the law and gave us the new covenant. Now, granted, that doesn't mean you can now disobey the law. As a matter of fact, the law is still our guide, Paul says. Yeah, you want to know how to live under the mercy of the new covenant? Well, look at the law. If you don't want God's wrath to come upon you, then obey the law as best you can. Here's the difference. If you falter, the law can't save you. All the law will do is still condemn you. If you come to the law and say, hey, will you forgive me for breaking the law? You know what the law will do? It'll laugh in your face. I can't forgive you. I have no power to forgive. I'm just the law. I'm the law. You can't expect anything else from me except law. I'm really good at showing you where you've messed up. That's my job. Law. Okay. But in the new covenant, you can sin against the law and then come to Jesus and say, I am sincerely sorry for what I did, and I pray to God that I don't do it again. And you will be forgiven. Because why? The new covenant has the power to forgive. That's why it's called a new covenant. The old covenant had no such power. All it could do was condemn you. Okay. So in that, you have this, because the law could come back and say, hey, why are you forgiving him? How many times has he committed this sin? And you know what the odds are? He's going to commit it again. So isn't it kind of superfluous to say, hey, yeah, I'll give you mercy, knowing that he's a weak human being and he's probably going to do this or some other sin to compensate. And, it never changes. The law could give that kind of an argument. Okay. And on the mercy side, it is, okay, look, he's trying. He really wants to do good. Yet, as even St. Paul says in Romans 7, he's got this other side of him that says, hey, buddy, see if you can get out of this one. Yeah, so we can sin the next time. You know, like those angels on the left and the right, you know, talking to you. Well, that's not too far-fetched from what St. Paul says in Romans 7. You got this little devil angel on the side of you saying, hey, come on, man, you know how to play the game. So we can get what we want. Okay? Yeah, you have one of those in you, analogously. It's called the old man, the old nature. Concupiscence is what the Catholics call it. Okay? A term is as old as the hills. That's what Adam left us when he sinned. Yeah, that was the punishment that was given to the human race. Thanks, Adam. This thing called concupiscence, this gnawing of and giving us what the Catholic Church calls the proclivity to sin. Okay, so the moment you walk out your front door, you have what the Catholic Church calls a proclivity to sin. Okay, and you got to carry that with you everywhere you go. No relief. Okay, so that's that's the reason you walk out, you see your neighbor there. Oh, what a son of a gun he is. You haven't talked to him, nothing, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere. Okay, it's automatic. Okay, so that's the condition that we're in. And a lot of that condition happens to be a part of why someone fell into the sin of divorcing and remarriage. All the pressures on them. As a matter of fact, here's an instance when Jesus is talking about marriage and divorce. He says, if you divorce your wife and she marries another person, another man, you are guilty of causing her to commit adultery. Matthew 5:32. Okay. Why? Well, because you put her, when in divorcing her without cause now, okay, this is the woman who's innocent, and the husband still divorces her. You put her in a situation where now she's got to fend for herself. She may have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. Who knows? Okay. She's got to take care of them. And how's she going to do that without a husband around to provide the income so that she can take care of her kids? So the first guy that comes along who's got some money in his pocket, she's going to say, hey, I'm available. And she gets married. And by doing that, she commits adultery. And so does the man who marries her, commits adultery. Why? Because she's still married to the previous husband, the previous man. Okay. So in that sense, he's caused her to commit adultery because he's put her in that situation, that circumstance. I'm not saying what she does is right, looking for another husband. She should know that the law says, you know, if I do this, I'm going to commit adultery. But sometimes the circumstances of life have such a pressure on you that you're tempted beyond, you know, what's reasonably understood as control of the situation. And you fall into this sin. Okay. Now, I'm not excusing it at all. Okay. Not excusing it at all. I'm just saying this is life. This is what happens in life, like it or not. Okay. So, there are situations in life where people get into this thinking and the pressures cause them to get remarried, and there they are. Okay. Now what do you do as a Catholic Church? Do you now side with the law and you say, okay, look, everybody in this category, forget about it. No mercy whatsoever. Or do you look at it on a case-by-case basis and say, okay, the circumstances here are unmitigated. They're just, we can understand why this happened. Okay. And we're not saying we're going to give you, blank check forgiveness. We're going to look at your situation and give you a determination. And you have to go by what the church says. And I think that's what the best side of what Francis is saying is that side. That we're going to look at this as a case-by-case basis. And we're not saying that, look, there's no guarantee here. We may only let 1 out of 100 people back into the church. Who knows? But we're willing to look at it and go more with the side of mercy, provided we get the right answers from you. That, yes, I really want to do what's right, and I'm asking for advice. I'm asking for wisdom. That goes a long way with the church. That is the best way to get into the merciful side, not the law side. Okay. With no guarantees, but we'll look at it. Okay. All right. So that's as much as I'm going to do on that. And I hope that clears up any reservations. All right. Oh, here's an interest. Casper LaRose says, God will judge above all righteously over man's law. That he certainly will. I always tell people, thank you for that, Casper. I always tell people, everybody's scared of Judgment Day. God's going to judge me for all I did. Well, I would much rather be judged by God than I would by any man that I know. Okay. Because I know God's going to be completely honest, completely just, completely forgiving and loving, because he's God. Who else would I want to stand in that position to judge me? Okay. The guy who knows it all. And the guy who says, hey, I'm long suffering. I'm patient. I'm kind. Okay. So being judged by God at the end should not put fear into anybody. That's exactly who you want to judge you. Okay. Because he is, as Casper says, going to judge you righteously. Okay. All right. All right. See, what do we have up here today? What are your thoughts on the current Israeli conflict? Oh, gosh. These Hamas nuts, Hezbollah nuts, this is not the way to solve the problem. And they're only going to get beat down. I mean, Israel's going to come in there and they're going to just bomb these guys to smithereens. So, I mean, you would figure they've been around long enough that they would figure out this is not the way to go. Egypt figured it out. Saudi Arabia is now saying, hey, look, come on, man, we're men. Let's put away these toys and let's get to the table. I don't care how long it takes. Let's get the relations started. Come on, man, this world's big enough for all of us. We can figure this out. If we can't figure it out, then what credit or what reward do we have? Do we deserve to even be here if we can't figure this out? We're not animals. So, but when you start acting like an animal and your passions get you so riled up that you can't control yourself, well, that's what we're seeing. Now, granted, the Palestinians have been beat up by the Israelis for years. taking land that was not assigned to them. I mean, they were both given 50% of the land of Palestine back in 1948. And right now, Israel has 95% of it, and the Palestinians have 5%, and even the 5% they have is given to them begrudgingly by the Israeli government because they're constantly threatening them. Okay? And the Palestinians, Hamas and Hezbollah, they get sick and tired of it. Okay? Stop beating up our people. Treat them with respect. You got 95% of the land to begin with. Okay? So let them have the 5% and live in peace. Don't treat them so harshly. They have a point. Okay? And so where it's all going to end, I don't know. But this is not the way to solve the problem. And it's just going to lead to further conflict. It might even lead to a third world war. Who knows? Who knows going to be the next guy that's going to come in there and help Israel? Or the next country to come in there and help Hezbollah and Hamas? You know? So. All right. What are your thoughts on, thoughts on Laudate Deum and the whole issue of climate change? Here's another liberal cause. All the liberals are involved. If you look on the map, you see all the liberals involved in climate change. And all the conservatives say, you're reading too much into it. Okay. And I'm puzzled as to why climate change would be a liberal versus conservative issue, except for the fact that liberals really like the Mother Earth, Mother Gaia idea of got to save the earth because this is all we have. And see, most liberals are atheists, so they don't know of a afterlife that would sort of mitigate their concern about Mother Earth. Mother Earth's going to be here for a while, but then it's going to be destroyed. But if you don't believe in an afterlife, then you believe you got to save Mother Earth because this is all we have, and and all that stuff. And that's what the liberals believe. Most conservatives are people who believe in God. Now, you may have different faiths, but you believe that there's somebody up there watching and controlling, and you do believe in an afterlife. Even conservative Muslims, conservative Jews, whatever the denomination, all the conservatives believe there's an afterlife. And so, there was a guy back in the Jimmy Carter presidency. I think his name was James Watt, W-A-T-T. And I remember him saying, now he's a conservative, believes in God, okay? And he said, well, why shouldn't we rip up the ground to get the oil out of it? The earth's going to be burned up anyway. So now that's sort of an extreme conservative where, he's got too many marbles on one side of the fence, and he brings his thinking to his extreme logical conclusion, which is not good either. Okay. Because if you go too far on the conservative end and you have this mentality that it doesn't matter what we do to the earth, you are going to pollute the earth. Okay. And we are going to have a hard time breathing. So we have to give credit to the liberal side for bringing some of these ultra conservatives back to the middle and stop saying, who cares whether we frack all over the place and make the ground unstable? Okay. Now that's a possibility, you see. And then you get contamination of all the other things coming into the ground and gets into your drinking water. And so the liberal side has some concerns that are legitimate. Okay. But then they go to the extreme. And now climate change is the cause for every evil that we have in the world, from financial to atmospheric to whatever. And that becomes the mantra. That becomes the thing that you make the whole part of your life. And everything revolves around climate change and blah, blah, blah. Because we have to save Mother Earth. That's when you go to the extreme. Okay. So there is a happy medium between the two. And hopefully we get the right people in office that will see that with reason and try to implement it as best as possible. So, okay. Question: are Bible translators, transcribers infallible? No. I have a Protestant friend who thinks that since they are not infallible, it follows that an infallible teaching authority isn't necessary. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the way we would answer this is, oh, and I got one more mail-in question here I forgot to look at, so we'll have to do that. The mistakes that a transcriber or copyist does when you have the original, what they call original autographs of the Old and New Testament, that is the exact words that were given to the man through inspiration that he put on the paper. Okay. Now, sometimes in Paul's case, he had Tertius be his stenographer, so to speak, and Paul would get the words by inspiration from God, and then he would vocalize them, and then Tertius would write them down on the vellum or whatever, papyri, whatever they were using. Probably a form of papyri. Okay. All right. So what we would say is that those words are infallible, or better words is inerrant. They're inerrant because Paul gets each word from God and then vocalizes that word, and then Tertius writes it down. Now, somebody may say, well, what if Tertius makes a mistake? Well, Paul's going to go over that little piece that he wrote and see if everything's kosher. And if it is, has Paul's approval, and Paul knows what he said. Somebody would say, well, what if he forgets? Well, I think Paul would be the best judge of that, especially since it's a very confined time. You were talking about within the hour. So it's not like it's days later where Paul said, well, what was I inspired with? So I think that issue's taken care of. So after that, what happens to the vellum or papyri that Tertius writes on? Well, it's gone. Okay. But before it's gone, copies were made of it. Okay. Every single word that Tertius wrote, copies were made of that. So the epistle to the Romans, Corinthians, whatever, copies were made of that. And we've got 5,000 copies of it from the time that they made copies in the first century, in Paul's day or Peter's day, to the time of 2023. We have 5,000 different Greek. That's just the Greek. Okay. Within those 5,000 manuscripts, we have less than a 1% discrepancy between each of them. Now, that is something. Okay. Because the copyists are not prophets in the sense that they work infallibly. They're just copying. Now, like the monks of the Middle Ages, that's all these guys did. Besides fixing their gardens and cleaning up the monastery, that's what they did all day. They copied manuscripts. And we have every single one of them. Okay? Now, there may have been some that are destroyed in a war or something. Okay, so they're gone. But we have enough to compensate for all of that. Any eventuality that life has, because we had thousands of monks copying. Okay? And they would check each other's writings to make sure that it was right. So one monk would copy, and then another monk, all he did all day was check to see if the copy was right from the previous copy that he had. Okay, it's like those guys who, when they made the Rolls-Royce, and then it came for final inspection. The Rolls-Royce mechanics boasted that if there was even a slight sound when they started up the engine that didn't sound right, and they could tell because these guys had been around engines all their lives, and they knew what a perfect engine would sound like. If they heard anything that was off kilter, they would take the whole engine apart and build it all over again. Okay, that's how Rolls-Royce got their reputation. That's why you would see Rolls-Royces on the street 200 years later, 100 years later, whatever, and with the same engine. So that's what these guys were like with the Greek manuscripts. Okay. The Jews were like that too. They boasted that if they found one flaw in a copyist's manuscript, they would throw the whole thing out, start over again. You got to understand, these guys believed it was the Word of God. They really believed it. Just like we should today. But we don't. I do. Okay? So I can see what mentality they had back then. And that's why today, less than 1% of all those manuscripts have discrepancies. Okay? And the discrepancies you find, it's a letter here, a letter there, a word here, a word there. Okay? And we have one codex, Codex Bezae, otherwise known as Codex D, where the copyist thought that his job was to add things to the scripture to make it clearer. So he would add, Greek phrases here and there, all over the place. Codex D, Codex Bezae, in case you ever run across it. And so we pick up on this. So whenever we see Codex Bezae disagreeing with what's there or has something in addition, we always say, oh, there he is again. There he is again, adding something that he thinks will clarify the original Greek. And sometimes the original Greek needed clarification. Okay? Because you couldn't put everything into one sentence. And or because the event really wasn't totally described. It was just sort of hinted at. And so Codex Bezae would come along and say, and here's what else happened, blah, 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 blah. But he has a reputation. So whenever a manuscript expert sees Codex Bezae, he says, oh, watch this guy. Usually he's wrong because he has something that no other Greek manuscript has. Okay. So we have to deal with that issue. But still, considering all that, less than 1% of the New Testament has discrepancies. Okay. So not infallible, but do we really need infallibility to read something like John 3:16? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Do you really need an infallible scripture to say that? Or can you read it and know that, oh, that was copied from this copy and that copy and that copy, but there was an original where Jesus really did say that and Matthew really did write it down. Okay, that's all you need. Okay, because what are we talking about here? We're talking about what you need to be saved. That's it. Okay, so I don't need to, well, unless it's 100% infallible, I can't believe it. No, that would be absurd. Because if it's 99% infallible, let's say, if I can use that word, 99% correct, I don't need anything else. It would be illogical for me not to believe in John 3:16 because it's only 99% correct. That is the New Testament. It's only 99% correct. That's laughable. Okay. So there's the best answer I can give to that question. All right, let's go on here. Do you believe the moon landing was real? Honestly, I have my doubts about it. Okay. I have my doubts about it. I don't have any problem with sending probes and satellites to Mars, Venus, Saturn, wherever they send them. Okay. I do have a problem with whether a man can survive. That's the problem. Because of all the pressure, temperature, radiation issues that are involved, that would be the issue. Okay. If it can be proven that a man can survive the Van Allen belts and all the other radiation he's going to get in a spaceship that's what? Paper thin with aluminum. Okay. If they can prove that, then I wouldn't have any problem. Okay. But until that is proven, then I do have my doubts. Okay. All right. Last week I gave you a question about dancing, but you addressed it from being already married standpoint. What about when you are still single? Sorry about that, Gasper. Okay. That's a good question. Well, what did I end up with when I answered that question? 1 Corinthians 7:1. Okay. What did that say? It said, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. It is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, in verse 2, let every man have his own wife. Okay. And it even tells the married couple in verse 9, it says, it is better to marry than to burn with lust. Okay. So, if you're in that situation, better to marry. But the first verse says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, a lot of translators didn't like that. So they changed the word touch, which is the Greek word touch. They changed it to get married. It is good for a man to be married. Okay. I even brought up the translations that show that discrepancy. I think the RSV had, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. I forget which one. Was the NIV? I think it was the NIV that said it is good for a man to be married. Let me just see. Hold on one second. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I had the wrong thing. It says, now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Okay. So it would still make sense if you said, now for the matters you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife. Okay. In other words, yeah, okay, I won't touch a woman, but, what am I going to do with these urges that I have? God gave them to me. What am I going to do with them? So, okay, I won't touch a woman, but then what? Will I end up doing something worse? Okay. Touching in all the wrong places and getting involved in something I wish I wasn't involved in. Okay. So it works contextually because you can say, yeah, okay, it's good not to touch, but look, in order to get out of that temptation where you're tempted to touch a woman and you know you shouldn't, it's better for a man to have each man have his own wife. Then you can touch all you want. Okay. But, and that it just reinforces the fact that the first verse says, don't touch a woman. Okay. So look, I have no choice but to apply that to dancing. Okay. Now somebody may say, well, what it's like if it's a square dance. And the only time you touch a woman is like when you connect with elbows and you swing her around and stuff like that. Okay, look, it's not black and white. It's not cut and dry as we would like it. Okay. We just have this stipulation from Paul. It's good. Now he says, no, he doesn't say, look, I condemn you if you touch a woman. He says it's good not to touch a woman. Why? Because it leads to other things. That's why. Things that will be immoral if you keep pursuing the touching. Okay. So, like if you're in a square dance or something, and it's, how long does the dance last? 5 minutes? And you happen to touch a woman, okay. And then the dance is over. Okay. So you survived without sinning. All right. All you know is it's good not to touch a woman in the sense that if it leads to other things, man, I got myself in a heap of trouble. And that's not what's good. Okay. So it's better to have my own wife. I can touch her all I want. And then I just have to make sure nobody else touches her. And I touch nobody else's wife. And, because that's how things start. Okay. Because once you allow that touching to occur and you're touching a woman who's not your wife, look, guys, we all know what happens, don't we? Yeah. Okay. So let's be honest with ourselves. You want to be holy, the holiest you can be. All right. Where you even limit the thoughts. Well, what's going to help is that you have a solid confirmation in your soul. I'm not going to touch another woman. I'm just not going to do it. Okay. So that applies to married and unmarried, right, Jasper? All right. So we got a few minutes left here. Have you heard the claim that Satan was the one who actually gave humans free will and choice, since he questioned them if God really? Yeah, I think you asked that last week, and I said no, that's false. What does C2383 and 2386 mean? It looks like I answered that one last week too. Where does submission of mind and will come from in Lumen Gentium? Was it added to the profession of faith, and what difference did it make? I think all they're trying to do is reinforce the idea that you have to be fully engaged. Okay. In other words, you don't just give lip service to the Pope or the bishop and say, yeah, okay, whatever you say. This has to be one of those things where you say, okay, I am submitting. Look at what I'm doing. The Pope, the bishop said this. I am submitting my mind and will to that decree. It's not like, okay, they said this and I, first way I can think of to find a way around it, that's what I'm going to do. That's not submission of mind and will. That's submission of yourself, or that's submission of their decree. And now you're the authority who doesn't like that decree, so you're going to find a way around it. Okay. That's why they put it in there. All right. Why did the church not allow cremation and does not allow spreading ashes? What was the apostolic teaching on it? There was no apostolic teaching on it. This is something the church decided more or less on practical grounds of the symbolism entailed by cremation. In other words, the world was cremating left and right. Okay. Sometimes for practical means, to get rid of the bodies. Other times because people thought that somehow they would escape the final judgment if they no longer existed, even in dust. And that's why they spread them over the sea, to spread them out as far as possible as an effort to keep God from bringing them all back together and making you the body that you once were at Judgment Day. Okay. So because of that connotation of cremation, the church said no. The Bible speaks about God opening the graves and raising the bodies out of the graves at the end of the world. And now scientifically we know that that's, there's not going to be a body there. There will be the elements of the body there, all the elements that make up the body, carbon especially, water in vapors form, or there may be gold from gold teeth. I'm just speculating now, but the whatever element made up the body is going to be there in a dust pile. It's not going to disappear. Okay. The bones may disappear because they're going to fall into the elements that they're made of, but all the elements are there. So in that sense, the Bible is true. Those elements will be raised and refashioned into a body. Okay. So just like God took dust from the earth and made Adam. Okay. God can take the dust from your grave and make another body very easily. So when the church sees that, they're going to say, okay, this is against the idea of cremation, because that is for the purpose of trying to get rid of the elements. Now, we know scientifically they can never really get rid of the elements. They have the ability to spread them out as far as possible, as opposed to the fine locale of a grave where they all are. And so the church decides, okay, this is not the best way to deal with the dead. And for the spiritual reasons, for the physical reasons, for the scriptural reasons that I just gave. Okay. And that was probably a very wise decision. Did you buy into the theory that the atmospheric pressure on Earth was 2.5 times higher before the flood? This would explain why creatures grew much larger in the past. Oh, it may be. What we do know is that the climate of the antediluvian age was different than the climate of the post-diluvian age. Okay, it had to be, because the land masses were moved apart, and you had probably more water on the surface of the earth than you did prior to the flood. So you add all those things together, and you're going to get some temperature and pressure changes. So not only would you have pressure changes with an atmosphere that may have been diluted, okay, to a certain extent, you're going to have, and more importantly, you're going to have temperature changes. And all you have to do is decrease that temperature by an average of 10 degrees, and you're going to have some big problems on Earth. Okay. So it doesn't take much, because the envelope of life is very small. In other words, you need the precise temperature, pressure, and if those things are off kilter, it may not do it immediately, but over time, it's going to wreak havoc with life on Earth. Okay. I mean, look at our body temperatures. I mean, if it's not 98.6 or near there, you've got big problems. If you got a temperature of 95 and not 98.6, that's going to cause some big health problems. If you got a temperature of 100 which is only 1.5 degrees above 98.6, you got big problems. It's going to wreak havoc in your body. Okay. So those temperatures have to be precise and they have to be stabilized in order to have biological life. Okay. Inorganic life doesn't matter. Gold can exist whether it's freezing or, turned into gold vapor. Doesn't matter. But organic life is very sensitive. Okay. So any disruption, either way, okay, is going to cause problems. And that's why the ages decrease so rapidly. Pre-flood, they were all, Adam lived to 930 years. Seth, 875, I think it was. The highest we have is Methuselah, 969, but they're all pre-flood. Okay. As soon as the flood came and the climate changed a bit, we saw a dramatic drop in the ages. Seth was 600 when he died, and then the next guys were in the 400s. And then there were 3 of those, and then the next 3 were in the 200s. Okay. And then you finally get to Abraham, and he dies at 175. And Jacob dies at 130. Joseph dies at 110. And so you see the decline. Okay. And that's because of the post-Diluvian changes to the climate. It really didn't take much. Okay. And pressure may have been one of them. As a matter of fact, as soon as you change the temperature, you're changing the pressure. All right. If I attend Saturday evening Mass after 8 p.m., do I need to go to Sunday? Does not this fulfill canon law 1248? After 8 p.m., I don't know. You have to ask your pastor. Okay. Ask the bishop. What's the time limit? Okay. I don't set the time limit, and I don't know what it is for each parish. It may change from parish to parish for all I know. But you need to ask them. All right. I think we got time for one more. Could you describe what is modest apparel for women? Can women wear pants? What length is the skirt still suitable? And the neckline of the shirts? Can men ever be shirtless besides the beach? You're gonna force me to answer all those questions. Come on. I think I dealt with this in the past once, and I'm not going to be definitive on this, okay, because this requires a general sense of what modesty is. You have to have that sense in you. And if you do, you're going to be very sensitive to what you wear. Now, just like I just talked about touching a woman. You go to a dance, you're unmarried, Gasper, okay? And you are debating whether you should dance with this woman or not. But it's a square dance, and everybody's sort of mingling around in the square dance, and you figure, okay, this is all right. I'm only going to be here for 5 minutes anyway, okay? But you see why you think that way? Because you've developed a sensitivity to whether you should be touching a woman or not. And once you develop that in your conscience, then it's always going to be with you, and you're going to be thinking about it wherever you go. How can I protect myself from falling into fornication? Basically is the question. And that is by not looking with lust on a woman, as Jesus said. And as Paul said, don't touch a woman. And that even makes more sense now, because if Jesus says don't even look upon a woman to lust after her, well, of course it makes sense that Paul would say don't touch a woman, right? Okay, so that gives you the sensitivity of wherever you go, you're constantly aware of this. And I'm sorry you have to carry that baggage, but you do, because we live in a sinful world. And if you let yourself go, you're going to fall eventually. So you have to have good fences. Keep those fences up so that you don't fall into sin, because Fornication is one of the worst sins that the Bible tells us about. Because if you commit fornication, you become one flesh with that whore or whoever it is, and you're not going to change that. That's there for life. Wow. You see how serious it is. So, same with apparel. You have to develop a sensitivity. What am I putting on? Who is going to be offended by this? Number one. Who is going to be tempted by this? Number two. Okay. Who am I going to hurt if I do this? Okay. And think honestly, why am I putting on something that shows a little bit more skin? Who am I out to impress? I'm out to impress somebody else other than my spouse? Okay. Well, the answer to that question is yes. You better think again what you wear. Okay. So that's a big question. Who am I out to impress? Okay. Even an evening gown, for Pete's sake. If you got a low-cut evening gown, you're asking for trouble. You're causing all those guys out there to lust after you when you could have worn something a little bit more modest and nobody's having a problem. Okay? So you got to develop a sensitivity. It's the only thing I can say. And then all those questions you asked me, you can answer yourself. Okay? All right, people. That is the last of the questions for today, Wednesday, October 11th. I hope you're all enjoying the nice weather. That's what I'm going to go do right now. And I'll see you on the 18th. Prior to that, please visit robertsongenis.org. See all the good material we have for you. By the way, we're building a new website that is going to cater to the science issues, but we are going to have a new one. And someday I'll have a new one for the theological, biblical stuff as well. And update on our movie, How the Earth Was Made in 6 Days. I think I said last week my producer's hard drive broke down and it is not retrievable. And hopefully that will never happen again. But he was here to interview me yesterday, and so that's going to be put into the movie. And once that's all done, we'll have it ready, and we should be having the movie out by, I'd say, the first week of November. So all you who have been waiting for that, it's still on the burner. The books are still in the process of being published. The 2 books that I have coming out, one on supersessionism and the other on whether the Jews will be saved. And what else do we have? We have the new disc that I put out a couple weeks ago called Refuted, the 10 Top Biblical Reasons the Young Earth Creationists Have Problems. I refute that. And let's see, what else do we have? The Bible, we're still working on it. The last book to be done is the book of Acts, and I'm more than halfway done now. And I expect to have that completed by the end of the year. So hopefully I can keep you all supplied with all the theological stuff that you really need to keep your Christian life going. That's my purpose, and I hope you all appreciate it. And that's it. So from here, goodbye, and I will see you next time. Take care.